Hey YouTube, hope you're all keeping well out there. Now, a good few months back, I did a pretty drunken video of my top 5 retro video game bosses, and this is kind of a spiritual successor, if you will, to that, and it's based on video game weapons, but this time I've expanded it to 10, and it's not strictly retro game weapons. There are a lot of retro games here included, but a couple of more modern ones as well. And these aren't necessarily my top weapons of all time or anything silly like that, but they're weapons that hold a nostalgic, memory for me, and they're kind of linked to seminal games and benchmark games, and with great memories in my gaming career, if you will. So, and in the games, I'm going to work my way through in chronological order of system and release. And the first platform is for the Super Nintendo, and my favourite game of all time, or joint favourite game of all time, Super Castlevania 4. And it's obviously the Whip, aka the Vampire Killer. Now, I used to go around a friend's house and play on his Nintendo and play on the earlier Castlevanias. They were great, the Whip weapon was great there. But in this one, they programmed it to have so much more functionality. You could swing your whip in like a 360 degree motion almost. You could kill enemies below you, above you, oncoming, and you had this function where you can almost you had a spasm and you would sort of jiggle your hand around and it would just sort of like whip around as like a defensive mechanism. And the other thing I would do is always hold it out in front, and it would just drop and just be this wall of death. So those bloody Medusa heads that were flying from the side of the screen, they would just come towards you, hold the thing out, smash, dead. And then also enemies below, you do the same thing, and then the big ball on the end of the whip, providing you upgraded it, was dangle on enemies below, just absolutely smashing to bits. Fantastic weapon. And the whip was quite a unique weapon for video games. Obviously the most famous whip weapon is in pop culture is probably the Indiana Jones whip. So maybe, I don't know, maybe they got it from there, I don't know. Probably. But there's that one. Now the next game is a run and gun game, which is one of the best games on the Super Nintendo, and that's Super Pro Protector Alien Rebels, aka Super Contra 3 Alien Wars. And this game's got tons of great weapons. I know the spread gun is considered one of the best. I actually like the homing missile as well, but the weapon I love the most in this is the standard default machine gun. It is a force to be reckoned with. And you could do that thing in this where you held down both shoulder buttons, and you could do it with any of the weapons. And you could obviously have one weapon in one hand and one in the other, and you would just do this kind of like, and hit the jump button, and you would just sort of jump around, creating this firework display of bullets and mayhem. But the standard default weapon in this is absolutely fantastic. It's got a great rate of fire, obviously. You can control it in any direction you want, and if you really hone in on some of the boss's weak points, it will do a ton of damage. I absolutely love it. It's so versatile. It's, I think, the best weapon in the game. And next is for a shooter. Shoot 'em up on the same system, the Super Nintendo, and that's Super RType. Again, a series which has loads of great weapons. An honourable mention is the laser that kind of fires out 3 ways, or 2 ways, diagonally up and diagonally down, ricochets off the ceiling and off the floor, and just kills anything in its path. But it's not that weapon. The weapon I'm talking about is something I used to call the Rings of Death. And well, what was the anti-air laser, it's called in the booklet. And it's basically these rings that would just fire out in front of you, and it was just a wall of absolute destruction. And it was such a great rate of fire. Again, a bit, probably why I liked it, similar to the weapon in Super Pro Protector. It would just destroy anything in its path, had such a wide spread on it, And the other good thing about it is it would cover the top, front portion and bottom portion of your ship. So any other aliens or ships coming into your area, it would just instantly take that out. It acted just like a very dangerous force field for your vehicle, for your ship. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant weapon. Next, we're going to jump onto, oh no we're not. We're not going to jump generations. I haven't got this game because I don't collect for the Mega Drive, but it's Streets of Rage 2's Metal Pipe. Now there's something about that, I'm going to sound quite barbaric now, something so satisfying about hearing that 16-bit thud of that pipe cracking on some street punk skull. Brilliant, brilliant. Not much more to say about that one really. Yeah, I think I'll leave that there. Now we are going to jump generations now and go on to the PlayStation 1, and that's Doom. How can we leave this game out? I'm not going to go for the one that everyone else is probably thinking. Maybe there's a few actually in this one. But the gun I used to really like getting in this was good old-fashioned minigun. The damage that thing could do was fantastic. And the sound it would make, it was brilliant. And it was almost, I think it was the first time I saw that kind of gun in a video game. And a gun that we saw in movies back, obviously a good few years before that, probably about 5 years before that, was the Gatling gun in Predator. I don't know about you guys, but when I saw that in the film, I was like, oh my god, what is that? And Dad explained that it was it would be attached to a helicopter back in the day, and obviously it was extremely heavy to pick up and wield it. But yeah, to have a gun like that in a video game after loving Predator and seeing that gun, it was fantastic. And the destruction it would do to those big horrible pink blob things coming towards you with the one eye, just tore right through them. Absolutely excellent. Now on the N64, I've got 3 games, and the first one is for Turok. Again, another series that has loads of great weapons, and the one I really remember being blown away by is one you get right at the very end. It's like a nuclear weapon. You would just sort of fire this off into the distance as all these enemies are running towards you, and off it would go as just this grenade, and then just the screen would glow up really bright, this huge dome effect would take place, and just everything would just die. It was the most incredible, satisfying weapon you saw. And on the N64, you'd never seen anything like this before in video games, and I was just blown away by it. The next game for the N64, and the weapon is in GoldenEye 007. Again, loads of great weapons in this, but the weapon I used to love was the RCP. Loved that gun. Again, similar to Contra and RType, it was something that just fired so rapidly, nothing stood a chance. If you just it was almost like just one below a laser. That's how fast those little bullets were flying. And the beautiful thing was, in multiplayer, it'd all run around, and it could actually shoot through doors and I believe walls as well. Brilliant gun. But what's better than one RCP? 2 RCPs. You could dual wield in this game. And having 2 of those, you felt like an indestructible force. Except, obviously, if someone had the golden gun. But that was just silly. That was one of those guns that you just thought, you're not playing with that. And the last game for the N64 is Turok 2 Seeds of Evil. Now, the weapon in this is probably very, very famous or infamous. It's the Cerebral Bore. What a weapon that was. You basically fired this thing off, and it had a homing, I don't think it had like a homing mechanism to it, where it would just fly to an enemy's head, providing you were locked on, fly into an enemy's head, and as the weapon's name suggests, it would bore into the brain of this poor bastard and just blow his head up. And to see that, especially with the fidelity that you had back then, because this was the game that took advantage of the expansion pack that we get for the N64, which gave it like an extra, I think it was like 4 megabytes of RAM, just to sort of polish up the textures on some of the games. Yeah, so you had that blood fidelity where the head would just blow up and then just sort of churn out. Brilliant, satisfying as all hell to release that on one of your mates in multiplayer. Brilliant gun. Now I'm going to jump a generation now to the Xbox. I don't collect for the Xbox, but I did own it, and I'll do a video on my Xbox memories coming up. Came out on the Xbox, definitely the PC. Don't think it came out on the PlayStation 2, and it definitely didn't come out on the GameCube. I think it was the first one that came out on the PlayStation 2, and that's Half-Life 2. And it's the gravity gun. And it's a weapon that was only possible from this sort of generation onwards because it depended on such a great physics engine which Valve developed. And it opened up so many possibilities on how you could kill your enemy. It was brilliant. You could pick anything up from crates to your enemies, fallen enemies, and shove them into enemies and knock them down, kill them, knock them off ledges, etc. And you could also pick up those like razor-edged discs things, and if you aimed it right, you could decapitate enemies and things like that. Brilliant gun, brilliant game, brilliant. Next we're going to jump a generation to the PlayStation 3, and this is one of my favourite games on the system, Dead Space. And the weapon in question is the default weapon that your protagonist Isaac Clarke has, and it's the plasma cutter. In this game you could get different weapons later on. They were great. Some were very fancy. But again, if you upgraded just your default plasma cutter all the way through and made it more powerful, I loved it. It was so versatile, the weapon. Basically, you play a guy called Isaac Clarke, who is a miner, mining minerals from distant planets, etc. And obviously would use this as a tool to break up rock, etc. I'm guessing. But you could hold this weapon out in front of you, and you could have it either horizontal or vertical, and there was the mechanic for your destruction of the enemies coming in. The idea was to sort of sever limbs, which you would do by either spinning the plasma cutter vertically or horizontally, and you could decapitate. Brilliant weapon, violent, obviously, with severing of limbs and decapitation. Brilliant game, check it out. Next, again for the PlayStation 3, is a first-person shooter game, Singularity. Now in this game, you get, it's not so much a gun, but a weapon. And it's called the Time Manipulation Device, I believe. And you could upgrade it with all these different other mechanics, but it was again another very versatile weapon where you could shoot this off from your hand. It would sort of like wrap around, and this ball of energy would come out and create a dome. This is one of its kind of abilities, and anything that fell in that dome, the time would slow down. So if you fired at enemies, they would move really slow, so you could obviously speed around and shoot them, or you could create it, run into it, this dome, and then time stood still there. So as people were shooting at you, as soon as it penetrated the bubble, the bullets would slow down, so you could just sort of dodge out of the way. It was like a barrier, basically. And other things you could do with this weapon is fire it at, and it was part of the mechanics of the game where you would flip back and forward in time, and any sort of dilapidated buildings, any ships or boxes or objects that were rusty and old and decrepit, you would fire the gun at, and it would make it new again, and vice versa. Anything new and spanking, you could turn back and age it. Not only could you fire this gun at inanimate objects, but you could fire this at your enemies and age them and obviously kill them. A bit like oh god, Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail, that end scene, classic end scene. You would fire the weapon at them and you would just watch before your eyes so they grew really old, turned into a skeleton, fell to the floor and then just disappeared in a big cloud of ash. Brilliant! Again, a very unique kind of weapon, which again was only probably possible in its glory on this kind of technology and on this generation of console. The next game is for another one of my favourite game series and favourite games of all time, Dark Souls. I've got Dark Souls 3 here. The weapon I'm on about is in here, but I believe it was first conceived or first came about in Dark Souls 2. And that is the Fume Ultra Greatsword. What a fucking thing this was. I remember first seeing it was probably in Dark Souls 2. In Dark Souls 2, you can have other players invade your world or call on them to invade your world, and if you beat them, you would obviously reap their weapons and gold and stuff like that. But obviously, if you died, you would lose your weapons and gold. And I remember some guy invading my world, coming into my game, and he had this ridiculous size sword. It wasn't even a sword, it was just almost like this stone thing that he was running towards me, and he was naked apart from just a pair of pants on, and the sword was resting on his shoulder, running towards me, and I was like, oh my god, this guy looks insane. And he just swung this thing once and I was just dead. And I was like, what the fuck is that weapon? And obviously transpires it was Fume, the Ultra Greatsword. But my god, what a weapon. Ridiculously powerful, would just destroy anything. I'm obviously showing some video up here. Swinging that thing around, nothing stood a chance. So anyway guys, that's my waffling. A few winds down. Would love to hear your thoughts on some of the weapons that you remember and love back in your video game history in the comment section below. Do a VR, whatever. Guys, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you again.